When we look at the history books of French children, this one is from 1915, but also modern day French textbooks, we find a mysterious character who plays a dominating role in the culture and the way that France thinks of itself. Do you know who it is? He's a rebel, he's a leader, and you never heard of him. Are you curious? My name is Lacey, and this is French in Spirit, where I investigate all things French. Let's go! I am convinced that to really understand French culture, we need to understand the culture of the people who occupied this territory before the Romans conquered it and made it their colony. Colonization can kind of have a big impact on local culture. All right, yeah, it does kind of look like Roman architecture. I think I can see the influence there. And so for a long time now, I have been curious about which parts of French culture have been handed down from the Romans and which parts, well, weren't. There is a lot of evidence that the peoples residing in these territories were much more capable than we are giving them credit for. I mean, in my history classes, I don't know about yours, these groups were generally labeled barbarian tribes, which is an interpretation that comes from the Romans who wrote down the history. And we get their impression. But we don't have the viewpoint of the almost 1 million people living in central France. So labeling them as barbarian discredits the advances that were made by these groups. We were taught in history class that the Romans brought roads and clean water. But actually, there have been lots of discoveries in the last 10, 12 years that there are roads predating the Roman Empire on French soil, or modern day French soil. And they built their towns nearby clean water sources, like springs. And so, in addition, they also made like local beer so that it would be suitable for drinking. So, you know, aqueducts are really great, but do we really need an aqueduct of fresh water when we have it at the source? The people that built these roads can be called the Celtic people. They had moved from the east seeking more fertile lands and less problems with their Germanic neighbors. They wandered and wandered until they arrived at various locations throughout present-day France and set up their own individual villages and towns. They settled, they traded with neighboring towns, they built the roads to the neighboring towns to facilitate that trade. They produced very delicate artisanal goods like jewelry and swords, really high quality swords that actually gave them advantage compared when they eventually fought the Romans. They invented chain mail armor that became popular in the Middle Ages. They had political forums and theaters. There is a lot to say about this Celtic people, and I'm going to get into that on a 3-day tour to understand more. Oh, somebody just peed in the elevator. Volcanic mountain in the middle of central France. Ah! So stay tuned for the other videos in this series. But first, I want to get into the story of our main hero, the first French rebel hero. According to the Roman writers at this time, they begin referring to the groups of people that are settled in this part of France as Gauls, which in Latin means rooster. And from this moment forward, this area from the Pyrenees to the Rhine is then referred to as Gaule. By the way, the rooster is still the symbol of the country of France. So, interesting factoid. So at this time in our story, you can imagine lots of little cities and villages with allies, some allied with another, but mostly independent, governed by local townspeople. And then as trade and industry starts developing, local leaders become more and more rich and powerful. They want to become even more rich and powerful. And so they try to gain influence over other local towns and cities. So, enter Caesar. Caesar is not our protagonist, but the enemy in this story. He's still young and relatively inexperienced when General Pompey, or Pompeius Magnus, had just destroyed and conquered settlements in Hispanica. And he is a mentor of Caesar. He gave the settlements to him to manage, and at the same time planted a little bit of a seed in the young warrior's mind. If you want to be in the history books, don't stay in Hispanica. Focus on Gaul. There you will be able to conquer not just a few squabbling tribes, but some of the most powerful and difficult adversaries of the Roman Empire. Side note, the region of Hispanica, now known as Spain, just as the nearby region of Aquitaine, really has a distinct heritage and culture from the rest of the Celtic kind of culture, because they were settled by Visigoth people and not Celtic people. And I just find that so fascinating that a lot of this local culture and language forms the basis of the local languages that are still spoken today. And not only in this region, but in lots of the regional languages across France. The Celtic Britain language of Brittany, the Alsatian language on the border of Germany and France, and like so many others, which I really don't know that much about, and I'm really interested to find out more. So, young Julius Caesar got it in his head to take over Gaul, and when he did, he eventually proceeded northwards with his troops, and he brought with him not just troops, but thousands of families willing to migrate as well. So it was clear that he meant to stay. So from his telling, he moves into the region, tries to establish Roman settlements. He quite quickly is able to set up allegiances with a few of the local peoples, notably the Edwins, who come from present-day Brittany. Now, we don't really know how the Celtic people felt about the Romans coming into their territory, since they didn't write it down in a diary, obviously, but they were trading with them. The Romans brought wine with them, which became popular. But, you know, they also raided and pillaged towns and burned them down, stole everything of value that they had, as well as they took lots of prisoners and sold them into slavery. Caesar and his generals became really wealthy from the slave trade and from conquering these areas. So obviously, it must have been annoying to the local people, I suppose. But there was already a long history of violence and fighting among the neighboring groups. A lot of their towns were set up in such a way, they were built into oppidums. Basically, oppidums are towns that were set up on top of a hill. And then instead of having a gentle slope, they carved in kind of an L shape all the way around, which made this slope even steeper and gave a lot of advantages if an enemy is trying to attack and raid your town. So it seems that they were used to and were very prepared for a lot of invasions. So when the Romans arrived, they kind of quickly agreed to an allegiance, a military allegiance with Rome, as a way to protect themselves and to maybe also get back at their neighbor that they've been fighting for centuries. Over the years, though, these relationships became strained. It seems that people got a bit tired of the Romans, and there became a recurring movement to unite the various Celtic groups. So enter our protagonist, Vercingétorix. The most famous of the efforts to unite the various groups was led by Vercingétorix, who, as it turns out, was initially taken as a sort of hostage and trainee of Caesar. You see, Vercingétorix was the son of a king. Often the Romans would take elder sons from leaders of these groups and train them among their forces as a way of cultural influence on the next generation. Plus, I guess you don't want young men hanging around with too much energy and getting crazy ideas. I don't know, it didn't seem to work. So, from the inside, Vercingétorix got to know the Roman methods, and he was able to observe them closely. When the time was right, he left, or maybe ran away perhaps, and went on a mission to speak to all of the different Celtic peoples to get them to work together to fight off the Romans and get them to leave this territory for good. I'll just interrupt here for a moment to say that if you're enjoying this story, there are many more videos on the way. Some are more travel focused and others are like this one where it's a real deep dive into culture and history. If you also are interested, I'm going to be hosting live Q&A sessions every month where we can share a glass of wine and to discuss everything that is French culture. So if you're interested in that, you can check that out on my Patreon page, which is in the link below. Now, back to the main story. So Vercingétorix manages to unite everyone together. He leads the troops that are a hodgepodge of different and previously warring groups, but he gets them all to head toward Gergovie, his hometown. The battle-by-battle fight, I'll admit, is not really my favorite part of history, but I really wanted to get an idea of what this place looks like, so, I had to go and check it out. There's a really lovely museum here that shows the battle and how it happened. Vercingétorix and his troops arrive from this river and set up camp on this hill. My guide, Marion, explained that the archaeologists on site have found some evidence that there was a very large wall, potentially 3 meters or 3 yards high and about 1 meter wide. Like, whoa, that is really huge. And this is no small town, it's 1 mile long. But the wall wasn't quite complete, so Vercingétorix sets up his camp kind of on the side as a way of protecting the back of the town and also perhaps to give access to troops who, when they weren't fighting, were working to complete the wall. Julius Caesar first stopped here and observed the townspeople coming and going to and from the water source. The unfortunate part of this town was that it is built on a very steep hill, so it has some strategic advantages, but it is difficult to get to fresh water. It does have a beautiful view, though.
Kill the enemy! Destroy them! Kill them!
Vercingétorix is successful at Gergovie because when the battle finally happens, they are just better placed on the top of this giant hill and are able to attack Caesar from 2 sides while still protecting the town. And the terrain made it hard. The terrain just made it hard to beat. This is the first battle Caesar ever lost, and it's only like one of 5 that he'll ever lose in his whole career. So he was probably pissed, to say the least. And Vercingétorix is not a name that he will easily forget. Vercingétorix follows Caesar to Alesia at this time, and Caesar has more time to prepare. He digs 2 long trenches with wooden fortifications to keep the troops at bay, and so the Gaule troops became completely surrounded in Alesia. Caesar cuts off food and water, and the supplies run out quickly. They send messengers to get the word out that they need backup. And eventually, a Celtic tribe, the Edwins from Brittany, finally do arrive with 250,000 troops. But there's no central command, and the former enemies have trouble trusting one another to such an extent that they refuse to fight alongside one another. They cannot imagine being on the same side in a battle. And so it's just disorganized chaos. In any case, Vercingétorix and his troops lose. They're taken prisoner by Julius Caesar and held in captivity for several years before Vercingétorix is eventually executed. Even though Vercingétorix did lose, his one victory over Caesar and his efforts to unite all of the Gaul territories and to overthrow this oppressor has become a sort of proof of this original French rebellious spirit. I mean, there are countless examples of how much Vercingétorix has really come to represent not only the Celtic people of Gaul, but it has become a synonym for the French people. And it's Napoleon III who really cements this young rebel's legacy, because Napoleon becomes fixated on learning more about the Battle of Gergovie after he finds some remains of the battle in the 1800s. He then endeavored a first archaeological dig to learn more, and he commissioned several statues to be made of Vercingétorix, one of which is now in the main city square of Clermont-Ferrand. But to me, the question is, did Napoleon III get the story of the Gauls right? The Gaul culture has really become so central to the French identity, mostly due to the popularity of a famous comic, Asterix and Obelix. But did they get it right? Check out my next video as I tease fact from fiction and explore a typical Gaul town to learn more about how these people lived and if it resembles French culture today. So I will see you next time on French in Spirit. Bye bye.